we are looking at the reasons that led to the defeat of the Central Powers. In other words, what were the reasons that led to the defeat of the Central Powers in World War I? Central Powers led by Germany, Austro-Hungary, were defeated by the Allied powers led by Britain. Before you continue, I usually emphasize our Kasoma Farouk of Uganda's idea, no one is coming. No one is what? Coming. The government is busy, your clan is busy, even your friends are busy. So it's upon you to liberate your what? Yourself. Because no one is what? Coming. No one is coming. Even the government is busy. So let us see the key reasons that led to the defeat of the Central Powers. That led, number one, the good military leadership. The good military what? When it came to the Allied powers, they had what you call a good military leadership. The leaders of military on the side of the Allied powers were able to mobilize people well. And in this case, they managed to defeat the Central Powers. Because all of those people, soldiers, fighting on the side of Central Powers, were believing in their leaders, which was not the case with the Central Powers. So we are saying the good military leadership of the Allied powers explains the defeat of the Central Powers. Because the Allied powers had leadership which was very great. Then the entry of USA into the war. It is said in April 1917 when it appeared that Germany and her allies were winning the war. In April 1917, Germany and her allies were winning the what? The war. USA had to join on the side of the Allied powers. When USA joined, I can tell you the game had to change. The game had to do what? Because USA had a great financial muscle, which it added on the Allied powers. And this explains why the Central Powers were what? Defeated. Then the Russian propaganda. In March 1918, Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. By this treaty, among other things, Russia agreed with Germany and Russia released the German, Austro and Hungarian soldiers that had been captured. You hear this. Russian propaganda. Russia carried out propaganda in 1918. It released the Austrians that had been captured by Russia. But in reality, it wasn't a release. Because by the time of the release of Austrian soldiers that had been captured by Russia, they had been indoctrinated with the Russian idea. With the Russian what? They were not willing to support Austria. However much they were released, but in real sense they were not what? Released. Because Russia had put propaganda in them that the Germans were wrong. And by this time, even if they were released, instead of fighting on the side of Germany, they were not willing to do this altogether. So the Russian propaganda that it had released, the Austrian soldiers, but in real sense, they had been indoctrinated with Russian what? Ideas. So instead of supporting Austria and Germany, they were not willing. They were believing in a country called what? Russia. Altogether. This explains why the Central Powers were defeated. Then the mutiny or riots that were staged by the soldiers of the Central Powers. It is said the soldiers of Central Powers turned against their government. The government was saying, you fight. Some soldiers were tired of fighting. They were tired of what? As they were tired of fighting, by this time, they rioted against their government. Instead of fighting, they refused to do what? To fight. So the mutiny, all riots that were staged by the soldiers of Central Powers, rallied against their governments. And this explains why we are saying in this kind of arrangement, that's why the Central Powers were what? Were defeated. Because the Central Powers soldiers turned against their what? Their government. They were tired of fighting. And this explains why the Central Powers had to be what? Defeated. The naval blockade by the Allied powers led to the defeat of the Central Powers. The blockade made it difficult for the Central Powers to import food. Naval blockade, it is said, the naval blockade, the ships of the Central Powers were not allowed to move. As they were not allowed to move, it is this that explains that the Central Powers could not import food. The question is, how were they going to survive? Many of them had to die because they were lacking what? They were lacking what? Food. As they were lacking food because of the naval blockade imposed by the Allied powers on them. This explains why the Central Powers were what? Were defeated. Then the propaganda of the Allied powers. It is said the Allied powers carried out propaganda that they were fighting this war against dictatorship to liberate the people of Austro-Hungarian people had to be liberated. It is said the Allied powers carried out propaganda that we are fighting this war, you people of Austria, to liberate you against the dictators altogether. It is this that made some Central Powers people not to join the war because they thought that the other powers were fighting to liberate them. Then the huge resources from the colonies empowered the Allied powers. It is said the Allied powers had huge resources from colonies. For example, a country called Britain. So they used all of these resources to overpower the Central Powers. And this explains why it was not easy for the Central Powers to defeat the Allied what? The Allied powers. Another one. There were disagreements between the Central Powers which forced Italy to join the Allied powers. In the year 1915, Italy was convinced to move from the side of Triple Alliance and join the Triple what? Entente. And this gave an upper hand to members of Triple Entente or Allied powers' strength. Why? Because they had got a new entrant. What was that new entrant? What was that new entrant? No, which country joined the Allied powers? Italy. You need to be intentional. Italy. Then the death of Francis Joseph of Austria in 1916. We are saying today, as Francis Joseph of Austria died, for him, Francis Joseph was supporting the war. But when he died, his successor Charles was prepared to end the war. Charles was prepared to end the what? As Charles was prepared to end the war, it is this that explains why we are saying the Central Powers had to surrender. And this explains why we are saying the Central Powers had to be defeated by the Allied what? By the Allied powers. So the war that started in 1914 ended in 1918, where the Allied powers defeated the Central Powers. Friends, we are still